We were talking earlier as a panel. I think two observations came up about the audience here, which I want to commend. One is we've been to many events, and we see a lot more non-Indians than Indians. That was one. And the second one was there are more women than men in this audience. So this is terrific, and happy to be part of it. Again, my name is M.R. Rangaswami. I'm the founder of a group called Indiaspora. It's a nonprofit leadership group of Indian Americans. We have some of our members here in the audience as well. And just to set the context, what we do at Indiaspora, just quickly, is we work on microphone. I think he's. I'm okay? Yeah, thank you. Okay, we'll continue on. Again, at Indiaspora, what we do, three different things. One is work on community issues, whether it's political or whether it's community-related, like we were instrumental in getting the Diwali stamp a couple of years ago when there was no such stamp in the U.S. Postal Service. We also get really active with the U.S.-India issues, but our primary goal of the organization now has been around philanthropy. And so that's when we met with Astra, and it's a great partner to have and a great event here. Just to set the context for the diaspora in the U.S., for those of you who may not be as familiar, we're about 4 million people in the U.S. out of the 30 million Indian diaspora worldwide. The Indian diaspora is very wealthy in the sense that its income is $109,000 a year. The average American makes $50,000 a year. Thank you. And so it's a very wealthy, kind of diaspora here in the U.S. But at the same time, we talk about our successes, but we also have to acknowledge that the diaspora also has 250,000 Indian Americans living below the poverty line. And these are the invisible people in the U.S. of Indian origin, and very few people know that. And the second other fact about the Indian diaspora is, after the Mexican community, Indian Americans are the most undocumented people living in this country. The estimate is about 400,000 Indians are living undocumented in this country. Okay? So this is a side that typically the diaspora doesn't talk about. We talk about the wealth, but we don't talk about the dark side of the community, if you will. So I think Indiaspora's role is to bring awareness to all these issues. And so philanthropy has been a big part of our journey. We have our summit again next week. Some of you will be there in DC on July 17th. We'll be unveiling the first Indian American survey of giving. So income levels of Indian Americans, who they give to, why they give, and so forth. And there'll be some interesting results coming out next week. Some of the numbers I can share with you, or some of the things I can share with you. One is, not in the survey, but in general, Indian Americans, like many other communities, initially tend to give to religious causes. Okay? So Indian Americans, we believe, in the past 20 years, have given over $5 billion to temples. Okay? Pretty big number, 5 billion plus. But they're evolving now. The next highest giving area is educational institutions. Indian Americans in the past 5 years, the evolution is happening, have given over $1 billion to U.S. educational institutions. Okay? And then now the next step of the evolution is going to be really giving to causes that are environmental, societal, and so forth. And Indiaspora's role in having the summit and doing the surveys to educate our community, we need to move on that continuum quickly to giving to causes that are impacting society, giving to causes in India, and also giving to causes here where most of us created our wealth. Okay? So that's the backdrop. We have three amazing panelists here. To my left is Payal, who lives in LA, works in their family company, doing amazing work there. Next to her is Raju Reddy. Raju has been a local entrepreneur, but now more of late become a big philanthropist, which is good to see. That's why we're joking with Payal. She became a philanthropist much younger than Raju or myself. Yeah. And then finally, Rati, Forbes, from Forbes in India, again, brings a perspective of what families are doing in India and giving to India, but also how they, kind of traverse the US-India corridor as well. So we'll start off by listening to them a little bit about their journey as to why they got into philanthropy and how they got into this area. So Payal, you're the youngest, so we'll let you go
Okay,
first.
Thank you. Sure. So I didn't really have a choice, to be honest. My grandfather started the foundation in 1999, and I guess he was the one to introduce us to philanthropy. My generation didn't join until 2009, at which point the foundation was split into two boards, a junior board and an adult board. And so if you were younger than 21, which was the majority of us, actually all of us in my generation at the time, then you sat on the junior board. And at that time, we would participate in grant making, site visits, and service trips. And I think it was the service trips that really had a profound effect on us, because it allowed us to get, on the ground, see what's really happening, the challenges that people in these communities are facing, but also the resilience that they have. And so that was kind of our introduction and my personal introduction into philanthropy. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
Great.
Yeah.
Good. Raju, how did you get involved?
Sure, yeah. So again, really delighted to be here with you all this morning, and thank you for the opportunity, Astra. So my background, I'm a tech entrepreneur based here in Silicon Valley. I first moved here about 30 years ago, so I've spent well over half my life here in the Bay Area. And so about 8 years ago is when Hitachi bought my company, and after which I've been spending much more time, I would say, just in the field of social impact and philanthropy. But prior to that, when I first moved here also, right out of India is where I did my bachelor's and came here for my master's. I must say I had this sort of a confused state of mind of doing something with India, in India, for India. A lot of us who move early on here from India, I think in some ways go through that. And so I was quite involved in starting an organization called SIPA, Silicon Valley Indian Professionals Association, which in many ways is a precursor to the TIE organization that perhaps many of you know about, right? And TIE has grown to be the largest network for entrepreneurs around the world today. And so, after the exit, after Hitachi bought my company, I certainly had, more time and, financial resources to apply to this world of social impact and philanthropy in general. And, the nice thing about Silicon Valley is, yes, of course, it's known for a lot of great tech entrepreneurs and all that, but truly there are remarkable, work that's being done, even in the field of philanthropy. And to me, one of my role models was Kanwal Rekhi, who some of you may know, who's done amazing work, just in nurturing entrepreneurs and one of the founders of TIE, but also in the field of philanthropy. So that's kind of where I started my journey. And, in some ways, with most things that I'm doing now in the field of philanthropy, it's also more of an entrepreneurial mindset to addressing social challenges. That's kind of how I look at it. I mean, sometimes it's like, if all you got is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So maybe I'm guilty of that, right? So entrepreneurship is the best way to address social challenges, kind of the mindset that I carry today.
Right. Rati?
So I think a lot, like many of you in the room, you're inspired with to start in your philanthropic journey with your family, role models like your parents. And then I was very fortunate to marry into a family that also had philanthropy as very much a bedrock of our values and our philosophy of life. And so that's kind of how I just got into it. But having said that, those were the kind of inspirations. But really, living in India, it's very hard to be immune to what you see around you. And initially, most of your philanthropy, or at least when you're much younger, tends to be kind of emotion-led. So you see something when you go to a local school, or you obviously drive past slum communities and you see the abysmal conditions of, for example, sanitation, like we you were talking about in the panel just before. And so it's more emotion-led, but I think as I grew older and got more into the whole area of philanthropy, I realized the importance of also reading, researching, because much in India is sort of anecdotal. It's some organization somebody belongs to, your aunt or somebody in the family has supported for many years, or some community and so on. And I think the importance now for really understanding meaningful or driving towards meaningful philanthropy, but using really good information that is out there now in terms of reports. There are some outstanding websites too in India which really give you data, and that really helps to inspire you towards more meaningful philanthropy.
So I know all of you have come from kind of different backgrounds. I just want to get into more of what is your thinking, what is your strategy, what is the roadmap of how you're thinking about giving. I know in your case there's a foundation, so is there a strategy that you've laid out, a plan and a process to kind of do the work?
Yeah, so it's evolved over time, I would say. So when we first started, I got involved about 10 years ago, and I was, just starting college at that point, and we were really focused on, our funding is split between, 50-50 locally, globally, and at the time we were focused on really, like core areas or of, issues like healthcare, economic empowerment, education. And we would pick and choose organizations that we felt fit, those pillars. But as we've evolved, we've found that instead of focusing on just the issues themselves, we need to start building long-term relationships with the organizations. So we, we had our hands in a lot of different pots, and now we kind of have refocused, and we work with a few organizations on long-term with long-term engagements, and are starting to explore different types of funding. So we're looking at unrestricted funding, impact investing, aside from just the traditional grant making. So as we move forward, I co-lead the impact investing team. So my cousin and I, we look at screening and meeting with different types of companies, that are focused on social entrepreneurial missions, and looking at how they're mission-driven, but also thinking about financial return. So we all have a different passion and different skill sets that we're bringing to the table, but we work together in finding ways to channel that energy. So to answer your question, I would say that our strategy right now has been focused on local giving, global giving, and then impact investing.
Raju, how about your entrepreneurial? Do you have a portfolio of things? Can you describe that?
Sure, yeah. So as it relates to India, there are two sort of big initiatives that I'm personally involved in, where I spend my time and capital. One is called the Kakatiya Sandbox. So this sandbox model was initially developed by Deshpande, some of you may have heard the name, out of Boston, in Hubli, in Karnataka, and model after that I started along with another tech entrepreneur in India in a place within India that's in northern Telangana, which is at the border of Maharashtra, Karnataka and Telangana. So the idea behind that is you pick a close-knit geography, roughly about 10 million population, and you work in that area over a period of time for you're really building an ecosystem for long-term social impact. And so if you have 20 such ecosystems, that's 200 million people, that's about 25% of India's rural population. And the three main constructs, if you will, without going into too much detail on what a sandbox is. One, I've kind of referred to that earlier, it's sort of bringing an entrepreneurial mindset to addressing social challenges, right? So charity is not something that, can always work. And so as Desh sort of describes it, combining the compassion of the non-profit world with the execution excellence of the for-profit world, right? So in everything we do, that's sort of a central element. Second, it's a bottom-up form of socio-economic development, meaning unless the local people are an active part of the solution, these changes are not going to be sustainable. I know Deval talked about capacity building within the communities where you operate. I mean, that's extremely important. That's one element of it. Third is scale. In a country of 1 billion people, there are a lot of people who are doing wonderful work in one village here and there, but unless you impact a large enough population, you're not going to make a meaningful difference. So that's why we picked this sort of 10 million population over the last 5 years. And I go to India at least once every 3 months. Over the last 2-3 years, it's been more like once every 2 months. So maybe it's entrepreneur approach or whatever. I'm sort of fairly engaged donor in that sense. Most of the times when I go there, bulk of the time is being spent in the villages and the area within the sandbox ecosystem. So that's one. The other initiative, I mean, you could argue whether it's for social impact or not, is more around the tech entrepreneurs. Few of us here firmly believe that some of today's India's product startups, building products for a global market, will go on to become global brands over the next few years. So there's a lot of these very exciting young entrepreneurs who are building amazing tech products. So that's an area, again, where I spend a lot of time. Maybe not as directly relevant to the forum here, but that's a nutshell.
Thank you. Rati?
So our focus areas have really grown to be in the areas of health, education, and then we also support research which leads to more meaningful philanthropy or more effective giving. So, so those are kind of the core areas, but I think the bedrock of it all is just a few key issues that we kind of keep in mind even while in those 3 thematic areas. One of them being that we really focus on sustainability in most if not all of the programs. So we kind of try and assess that at least 80% of the programs that we are funding year on year have an element of sustainability in them, because it's very easy in India to just fund like a classroom or a school forever and ever and ever, and then what happens if you pull out for whatever reason. So I think we do focus very much on sustainability. Even within education and health, what we try to focus on are innovative pilots that then could help go to scale. And very often there's not sufficient funding given to people who want to try something new. So we put aside some of our funding towards that. The third one is that we really like to focus on a collaborative approach, because like Raju just said, I think there's no substitute. In India, you really need to kind of collaborate and participate together. And that's one huge way to make scale happen and impactful scale. So we really try very hard to focus on that. And then we look at capacity building of organizations. Again, that's something that's not very well funded in our country, unfortunately. So whether it's capacity building of the NGO itself in terms of raising the awareness or enhancing the capacity of their own personnel, or could it be through infrastructure, and again, capacity building in general. And all this is very kind of measurable. One thinks that, oh, I'm just putting in this software program into an organization, but one can really see after 3 years or 5 years the ripple effect and the impact that this has had. So I think this is an important piece that we as donors need to look into with organizations that we are supporting.
Great. So just giving you a sneak peek of some of the survey results that I've had privy to, which will be announced next week. One of the things that kept coming out with the respondents is they are very leery of giving to India because they don't know if their money is going into the right hands. Okay, very big issue with the diaspora here is money being used, or is it being siphoned off? So, I mean, what are your experiences in that regard? How do you dispel that myth, or how do you channel people to the right organizations? Any ideas?
Yeah, you get on the ground.
Yeah.
I think for us, when we initially got into philanthropy, we would partner with organizations like AIF, brought them. I mean, some of them are here in the room, and we would Desera, and we would find ways to connect with people that were there and learn through them. And then over time, we decided that we wanted to focus in the communities that we're from, and so there wasn't as much happening in Gujarat, which we're Gujarati. So my grandfather decided to start a nonprofit in Gujarat called Diwali Ben Trust. And so we partner with Diwali Ben Trust to then administer some of the programs and initiatives that we intend, to program out in Gujarat. So part of it is partnering with, organizations that you screen, meeting people in the room that can give you visibility without having going there. But I think really ultimately you have to go there, and see it for yourself and find partners that are on the ground that you can trust.
Rati, any other ideas for the diaspora here to be more trusting?
I think actually it's not really whether it's the diaspora here or us sitting in India. I think it's like any kind of project that you are supporting, and I'm sure even in our own organizations, I think it's really important to understand the ground level realities, actually to pay visits, to put into place a framework that you mutually have agreed on right at the beginning. So very often I find with the organizations one supports, both parties have to be very clear as to what are you supporting, why are you supporting it, and what are we really going to measure year on year or quarter on quarter. Indian organizations also have a habit of sending you long and lengthy reports with a lot of anecdotal info and photographs. All that is nice, but let's cut it and just ask them for a one-pager and very clearly, what are the 3 things that you are supporting, which you want to support, which you want to see that your support is having an impact on. So, and then one last piece is, I think Indian organizations also suffer a lot from a founder syndrome. So you have amazing founders who have started organizations, but really sometimes the second line and below they've not really spent time building sufficient capacity. And that's the reason why, because that's been our experience, that's the reason why we've actually spent some time and some money in actually seeing how can we enhance capacity of the organizations. And really, I think most of them are very credible. And one last one, I think it's really nice when you have a stamp from an organization like Astra, for example, that they have done due diligence. And so you know that the organization you're going to partner with is a credible one.
Raju, how about you?
Yeah. Well, for one, I think the issue of trust, from my experience, what I found is there's actually erosion of trust even at the next level. Meaning, when you go to the villages amongst the people and all the other stakeholders, right? Whether it's the government or businesses or even nonprofits. I mean, the reality is, of course, it's easy to say, yeah, government should do this, do that. And of course, there are crooks in government, but they represent the broader population. So there are just equal number of crooks, if you will, in every other facet, including NGOs. I mean, it turns out that there are some brilliant ones that are doing exceptional work, but there are a lot of them either for issues of integrity, but even assuming integrity and ethics are in place, good governance, or they become very personality driven, like Rati mentioned, right? And so those are not very scalable, not sustainable, right? So that is a real issue. But at the same time, there are just extraordinary people. There are a lot of wonderful practitioners here in this room who are doing amazing work, and and also the problem space is so vast, right? In some ways, in India, everything is a problem. I mean, crossing the road can be a challenge, right? So, which also means there are that many more opportunities, right? And yeah.
The next question I want to ask is around giving, right? I think, Payal, you mentioned you give here and in India, and as a diaspora, most of us made our wealth in this country. So the onus is on us to give back here where we are living and make our money. So how are you viewing philanthropy, your philanthropy allocations domestic in the US?
Sure, so we have the same philosophy in our family, and my grandfather has been a huge advocate to give back to where you come from, and so most of our focus when we talk about local is within Orange County, which is where my family is based. So there we kind of look at what are some of the pressing challenges that Orange County is facing, and currently homelessness has increased dramatically in the last 5 to 10 years, and so we just met last year and we addressed that issue. We did some research and we found that, okay, what can we do together to address this concern. So we meet with local, authorities, the local governments, meet with nonprofits in the organization or in the field. We look at new innovation models in affordable housing and meet with those organizations. And we kind of, next week we'll have our retreat, so we'll all come back together and we'll discuss, what's the the path forward, and how much do we want to allocate to that. But really, it evolves over time based off of what we're learning and what we're seeing. I'd say traditionally we have focused on organizations like Big Brothers Big Sisters, looking at education and focusing on children's health.
I know, Raju, you've done a lot of work locally with things like the Save-a-thon. Maybe you can talk about some of that.
Sure. Yeah. So I must admit my sort of interest or attention to local giving started more recently, maybe about 10 years ago. And the initiative that MR is talking about is called Save-a-thon, which is just in its 10th year now, where once a year we bring different nonprofits. It has its roots in the Indian American community, but it certainly has an appeal and participation from just a broader population here. And so the idea is sort of the Indian Americans, we've been, of course, known as great engineers, doctors, entrepreneurs, but in the field of philanthropy, we felt there's a need to really sort of nurture that and promote and shine a spotlight on it, if you will. And so we use kind of Gandhiji as icon, and you say, he walked for freedom, what are you walking for? So whatever cause interests you, just get involved in the community. So once in a year, we have like a half marathon, a walkathon, but through the course of the year, we have various sort of forums that talk about sort of examples of giving. And so over 100 different nonprofits participate in that once in a year. It's normally in the summer months, July or August. This year it's on August 19th, which is a Sunday. So in downtown San Jose, we kind of take up most of that space, and so it's become a very popular event annually now here in the Bay Area. About 5,000 people come to that, and so that's one forum that I've been involved with. Another one, if I may talk about, since the topic is sort of local giving, there's just a wonderful organization called People Shores. Interestingly, it's actually started by, it's one of the sort of reverse innovations, if you will, a model that worked very well in India. The entrepreneur, Murli Vullaganti, he built a company called Rural Shores, which provides jobs through outsourced BPO services in the villages in India, and grew to be the largest in the industry today, in the BPO industry, employing about 4,000 people in about 23 centers across India in about 10 or 11 different states. So about 3 years ago, when Murali came out here, a few of us got together and said, hey, if you can really build successful businesses like that in villages in India, which is very challenging for a variety of reasons, why not right here in America? Because there are a lot of underserved communities right here in the US. And so that's how People Shores was created about a year ago. I know MR came there, and some of you in the room also came out there. I think Kavita, she's sitting at the back. Kavita Nala, yeah, if you get a chance, you should, yeah, she just raised her hands. So she's one of the senior execs there. And so the first center is right here in San Jose, which is focused on creating jobs in what the city describes as disconnected young adults. There are 13,000 of them in San Jose, and some of them are actually literally homeless people, and some might be on the autism spectrum, or different reasons why they're disadvantaged. And just amazing how significant that issue is, and it's a very solvable problem. I mean, right here in Silicon Valley, this place is the heart of Silicon Valley, right? And you'll be surprised, some of those, we have about 25 employees now. Some of them are even MIT graduates or Georgia Tech graduates. I mean, for various reasons, they fall off the wagon, and So the idea is to create similar centers across the US in various other parts of the country once this is, but it's a tech startup like any others. So far, it's looking pretty good. It's about a year into operation. So, anyway.
Rati, have you given, I have to ask you, have you guys given money to the US?
So I think some of them, I would say 98% of our local giving is obviously in India. But there is some giving, and from our family, there's been some giving to Stanford, because both my husband and my brother-in-law and both my children are alums, so that's how it happens. But I'd just like to say that local giving can be really, really very powerful. In the city where I live, in Pune, in India, we have two really, I think, nice examples, which I'd just like to share, if that's okay. One is that we've come together, corporates, local government, and a whole host of NGO partners and other stakeholders. And the piece that our company and me personally, we are very involved in is systemic change in the education system in the local municipal schools. So there are three verticals. One is digitizing Pune, one is education in Pune, and I've forgotten what the third is. But so it is possible to do it, and I'm absolutely convinced that systemic change, especially in India, and I'm presuming even in cities in the US, really can't happen with just one player. It has to be a sort of collaborative stakeholder approach, and it has been hugely successful in the last 3 years. And another one is we've just come together about 7 first-time philanthropists, and actually that was the catalyst, was Dasra's capacity building program for them in our city. And they have come together with a project within a school. And they're all first-time givers, small amounts, but they've all committed to this project for 3 years. I think it's very powerful, again, that even if you give small amounts of money, but you come together, then it's a larger pool, obviously, and you can actually make an impact. So,
time for questions. Any questions in the audience? Yes, there's one up front. Can we turn on the mic, please?
Or I could just, okay.
Yeah.
So Rati, I think you're mostly local in India, but for Payal and Raju, the balance between local here versus India, I mean, I find it an interesting question, and it touches, Payal, to what you said. You have a difference across your family members between social only, social, financial mixes. How do you find people balance between the need here, the scalability here, versus the need in India, the scalability in India? Is it an academic choice? Is it a sort of philosophical or heart-emotion choice? How do you pick? Because we all have limited time. I'm sure all the people you work with have limited time. How do you find people make that choice?
you guys to go?
You can go ahead first.
I don't know if I'm trying to balance my time exactly, between the two places. Obviously, this is where I live, and so I'm spending bulk of my time here. But I think it's more, it's the need, obviously, one can argue is much bigger in India, just to get the basics right. And so it's more in terms of, where do what causes appeal to me. But it's much like, in some ways, what I find with social impact, at least my experience, it's not that different from, investing in tech startups, right? I mean, which I do a fair amount as an angel investor. At the end of the day, it's all about, how good is this idea, how large is the market, but it's also the people involved with that. So to me, it's more of, where do I find the causes that appeal to me, and then, are these the people that I feel I can trust to build something of scale? So scale is also very important to me, I suppose, in anything, whether it's in India or here. When I look at sort of the initiatives that I'm involved, scale and the quality of the leadership team and people. But otherwise, I'm not quite thinking I have to allocate this much percentage of my time or capital, for that matter, here or there. Yeah. But clearly, the capital goes much further in India than here. Yeah.
I think for me, it's a matter of identity. I'm Indian American. I was born here, and my entire generation was. So this is home. So it makes sense to give back to home and where we're from. And I think a part of that is is spoken through the group. You know, we've had the ability and my parents and my grandparents have given us the platform to voice our opinions, and we've been really grateful to have that voice in the room. And so naturally, you know, there are issues that come up, and based off of our own interests, you know, some of us will gravitate towards more local issues versus global issues, and it kind of varies at different points in your life as well. You know, when you're younger, you're in college, you're learning about all of these different social issues that are happening, and as you're coming across different organizations, so you bring that to the table. As you get older, you know, my cousin's about to have a baby, and she's thinking about maternity needs and prenatal care, and looking at, you know, accessible health care, and that's a really big issue in India. So she's kind of focused in that direction. So I think a part of it is tied up in who we are, and I think a part of it is just by nature, you know, having both feet in both worlds. And there's, you know, I think strategically as a foundation, we've chosen to be, to fund both here and there and equally, split equally.
Can I add something to that, Emma? Okay, go ahead.
Sure. Go ahead.
I mean, just one of the things as I was thinking about on your question, it doesn't, some of these can actually be very synergistic between India and US. For example, the program that I talked about, Startup Bridge India, which is, you know, focused on nurturing product startups building for a global market. There we see sort of India is in a position to combine the best of both China and Israel to build these companies, right? But it's not all about just benefiting India when that happens. It's really because a lot of that comes from connections here, because India can be a bigger market for the products from US, and a lot of the investors are from here, mentors, board members. So there is significant synergies when that happens. I think that's the beauty of the place that we live in here, especially in Silicon Valley. I mean, we're so fortunate to have these sort of connections, and, you know, yeah.
Question here?
Yeah. So, Rati, you mentioned it was very nice to say that when you said capacity building is very important, and often it's, but what intrigued me was also you said that it's quite easy to measure, which is what we heard a pushback on, you know, capacity building is not easy to measure. And then later you also spoke about the fact that you have a simple sheet of what you're going to measure and see improvements. I think the question to you and to others are also, how do you measure these things, and what are some of, I don't mean the specific indicators, but what is some of your own learnings and reflections on how you measure if things have worked, and any evolution like in that area? Probably you ended up measuring the wrong things, and then
Can any of you jump in? I mean, it doesn't have to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Give me 10 seconds to think.
Yeah, why don't Payal, you start, and we'll
Sure.
have Rati.
That's a loaded question. I mean, I think if my grandfather were sitting here, he would probably say, as far as the dollar goes, right? So for him, how many lives are we impacting? That's always what it comes down to is, you know, if we're putting $10 towards this, how much of that is going to the people themselves? So that tends to be kind of a fundamental criteria or point of criteria for our family is when we're assessing organizations to work with. First question is, how many lives are we going to be able to make a difference in? So without getting into, like, you know, the details, I'd say that that's really generally the premise that we work under.
You know, one thing that kind of relates to the question that we asked, just in my sort of short over the last 5-6 years of doing the sandbox that I'm learning is, to some extent, it really comes down to creating positive role models at the micro level, in the villages, in the mandals, you know, the small towns. Because, you know, over a generation now, the last 20-30 years, there really are not very good examples of, you know, I mean, to some extent, even the government has been doling out money for all kinds of freebies, and there just haven't been enough people out there within the small, you know, the micro communities, right, that they can look up to. So that's kind of what we have found in the context of capacity building. Yeah, because when you do that, it's amazing. They're all very relatable. They can't relate to somebody like me, or forget about me sitting in Silicon Valley, even though I come from those towns like Nizamabad. You know, they can't even relate to somebody living in Hyderabad or Bangalore, you know, who might have done something. But when, you know, a kid from that village who might have grown up with a single parent or a whatever disadvantaged background, when he or she goes on to do something nice and actually get a meaningful job, it's amazing what impact that has on the others.
So I'll just conclude and say that I think it was a very good question. It's the issue what you want to really measure, or what are and both of you, both the organization and yourself, I really believe it should not be donor driven. And I think what very often happens in India, at least my experience says, that we are very driven on numbers. So we are often talking about, oh, we are going to impact 500 people or 1,000 people. But then somewhere along the way, you see the quality of the impact dissipates. And that's what we have really tried to focus on when we talked about capacity building from within the organization, that and the sustainability piece, that by year 3, 4, we still see that same quality of input as well as change is happening. And there are a few examples which I'm happy to share with you offline as well, where we actually kind of have tracked this and seen the difference that the initial investment has made, both in capacity building as well as in any other way.
I love that, sorry. I was just going to say that I love that you brought that up, because that's a conversation or a point of contention, I guess, in our family, because, my grandfather's generation is always thinking numbers, numbers, numbers. And, we're always thinking quality, leadership, people. And so I think that's definitely a conversation that's continuously happening in our families that really resonates.
I think we're run out of time. I want to just ask one final, sorry. There's someone who really no, sorry, we'll have to take it offline.
Okay.
So I have one final question for you, and that is, part of our survey, it's come out that Indian Americans don't give enough because they think other Indian Americans are stingy. And unfortunately, this has come out, but anything you can say, words of wisdom as to how you can appeal to the community to give more?
Oh, man.
Raju, leading by example.
I don't know. Yeah. So, one, it is just because the nature of the problems is so large and so wide in India, it's actually amazing just with a little intervention how much impact you can make. So I think people really need to understand that. And thanks to forums like Diaspora and others here, there are just a lot of wonderful organizations, great people, that it's not that difficult for Indian Americans sitting here, wherever, in Silicon Valley, elsewhere in the country. It's very easy to get in touch with these people. They don't even have to travel to India, right? Take the time. And once again, it's just remarkable what a difference whatever you're giving can be. And giving doesn't always have to be money, by the way. Right. It can be your time, your ideas, because a lot of these people have done extremely well in different walks of life, and all of that is very valuable to the people there.
Rati or Payal, just concluding remarks.
I think I would say find something you're passionate about, something that resonates, like what do you care about? And then find a way to, like you're saying, get involved, or whether that's, giving back money or giving back your time. And there's just so many different models that exist out there. So you can get creative with it.
So Neera's looking at us very strictly, so I'll make it 10 seconds and just say that I really believe, I think the whole area of like a participatory approach and understanding what the organization or the target audience really needs rather than what you want to do. And that really works very well in India because we have the advantage of spending a lot of time in the community and so on. And I wonder if that's something that when you're sitting here many, many thousands of miles away, you don't have that touch and feel kind of feeling that is so important, I think, in giving too.
And I think you guys have been great role models in getting other people to do more as well, seeing your passion and your belief. And I want to also thank Deval and Neera and Dasra for having us. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.